When something bad happens, have you ever said, why? Oh, that's human. We do. 19 times in the book of Job is the word why. 2 of them are by Job's friends. 17 of them are by Job. So that was something he struggled with. I will tell you from many years of speaking to people in crisis, why is normal, but it is a question God does not answer. The one he answers is, what do you want me to learn from this? So we're going to see the answer to that. We went 37 chapters in Job without God speaking to Job's question. And then when he finally speaks in chapters 38 through 40, there's no answer to anything Job asked. No why. Instead, God talked to him about the marvels of creation and the marvels of the animal world, especially those last 2 big dudes that we had, the huge dragons or monsters. I'm glad you came back after those lessons. They were kind of strange. And this is Job's final speaking to God in the conversation he had. Now, we said in one lesson that God defines prayer in Jeremiah 33:3. He defines it this way: call unto me, and I will answer you. So when we just talk, that's a soliloquy. When we hear back from God, that's true prayer. And so God's final answer to Job was not what he asked for at all. But look at what he says in verses 1 and 2 of chapter 42. Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do everything. Does that mean God could bring peace to Job if he never knew why all this happened? Ugh, that's not everything we kind of want God to do, is it? And in verse 2, Job continues, and that no thought can be withholden from thee. That word thought is interesting. Another loose translation says this of that phrase: what you conceive, you can perform. Now, I conceive of many things, and I lack the wisdom, the skill, the time, the money. No constraints are on God at all. But I had a great time with my magnifying glass and my Strong's Concordance. I looked up the meaning of the word thought, and I found out that although that word is in the Old Testament more than 100 times, there's 17 other words that are usually used to translate it, and this is a unique Hebrew word. And it means, in fact, in other verses, it's translated devices. But it's most often used of evil devices. Job said to his friends in Job 21:27, I know the devices you wrongfully imagine against me. And they did have evil toward Job. Or in Psalm 10:2, it says, let the wicked be taken in the devices they have imagined. Why is that word used about what Job has been through? And it may be because Job thought, God, what are you doing? This can't be good. This is totally bad. I don't know, but that's very unusual. Why does Job see it differently from God? Because it's a human looking at a situation and it's God looking at a situation. You remember when we were in elementary science class and the teacher had a glass of water and stuck a pencil in it, and like magic it looked like the pencil was bent? Because looking at a pencil through light is one thing. Looking at it through another substance is something else. And when you put on your reading glasses, because the lens is curved, that print looks bigger. Is it bigger? No. We are grateful for that. So, two different viewpoints see something different. And God says, my thoughts are so far above your thoughts you can't even imagine. And I will say in 77 years I have observed that. And it's certainly true of me. But can anything bad come from God? Ever? What about his righteous judgment of the wicked? It's righteous. How many times have we thought, I wish they would get what they deserve? Now, I thought of another application for those monsters we talked about last time. I thought about Job thinking about those monsters we talked about last time. That huge dinosaur like the bones they found in Oklahoma, 60 feet tall, twice as tall as our auditorium, 60 tons. Huge bones. They are bigger than we thought. And Job may have thought his trial was a monster. Bigger than it should have been. And actually, can a man in Job's day fight with that? No. And neither could he. That may be why God ended on that note. But look at verse 3. This is Job speaking, and he says, who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Now just let me say he's talking about himself. In fact, that's what God said to Job in 38:2. He says, Job, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? And then he admits what he's done in the second part of verse 3. Therefore I have uttered what I understood not. Have you ever spoken emotionally and strongly about something and then realized you were wrong? Yes, that's what he did. Well, look at verse 4. And if you want to put this parenthesis before, Job is still talking to God, but he's saying, when I said, listen to me, and I will speak. I will demand of you, and you declare to me. That's a little bit presumptuous, isn't it? But that is what Job said. Can we say that to God? I've heard people say that. I don't understand why God did this, and I'm not going to listen, submit, get over this. I'll have an argument the rest of my life with God. And then Job said, Lord, I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, and now my eye sees you. He's learned something. That word see in the Hebrew means I understand something. Not only did I not see it before, I saw it, but I couldn't understand it. Do you ever watch those old lawyer shows like Perry Mason? You know, his clients are always innocent. Well, I guess he had to do that. But the judge always says to the prosecuting attorney, do the people withdraw their charge? That's what happens. And that's what Job is saying here in verse 6. He says, I abhor myself. But that word abhor does not mean hate. It means disappear. I want to take back what I said. I want to drop my charges against you, Lord. I'm so ashamed. And in the last part of verse 6, I repent in dust and ashes. Let me see if you can think of any things Job needed to repent of. He was a very good man, described by people and by God as upright, blameless, righteous. I mean, he was good. I hope he repented of the terrible curse he had pronounced on the day he was born. You remember that, chapter 3? He said, I wish I'd never seen the light, wish I'd died, wish my mother never nursed me. And several times throughout his words, he says, I wish I were dead. And he has pretty well grown from complaints against God to charges against God in his defense. And he was utterly in despair. And what was the root of all that? Pride. That's what we all have. Before you were saved, I bet you said, I'm a good person. And I've found people who would say that, and they were law-abiding good people. And I've had people who were living in sin and doing every imaginable evil to themselves and to others, and they said they were good. Because we are all good in our own eyes. So Job is repenting of pride. And God never says anything else to Job. Well, I'm glad he got there. And we could know it. God now speaks to Eliphaz, the leader of the 3 friends that came and talked to him. Look at verse 7 and 8. And it was so that after the Lord had spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz, my wrath is kindled against you and your 2 friends. Why? For you have not spoken of me, God. What's right? Do you like somebody to tell lies about you? Does God like it when anybody does that? He does not. In fact, for many chapters, they did that. They misrepresented God as being angry at Job and punishing him for particular sins. And then they moved to in saying, Job, you're kind of a hypocrite because you won't admit these sins. But their argument was that calamities always prove guilt. If bad things happen, that proves you were guilty. Is that a scriptural belief? It is not. We're going to talk in lessons to come some more about this. Do you ever feel like when you are guilty and something bad happens, oh, well, we will deal with that in another lesson. And I want you to look. In fact, the last part of this verse is worthy of underlining. You guys have not spoken of me, the thing that is right, and I'm upset at that. And what does he call Job? As my servant Job has. In fact, that's what God said to Satan back in chapter 1 and chapter 2. At the beginning of all this, have you seen my servant Job? There's none like him on the earth. Are other people in the Bible called God's servant by God? David was. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were. He can use anybody. Moses was called the servant of God, and Joshua and Caleb in the Old Testament. Who is the servant of God in the New Testament? His son came to do his will. So God said to the Eliphaz, take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job and offer up for yourselves a burnt offering. That's a sin offering. And my servant Job, my goodness, he's called himself Job, well, 2 times in 2 verses. That's pretty good. And my servant Job shall pray for you, and for him I will accept your sacrifices. Well, now that's kind of, they got their comeuppance, didn't they? For what they said. And then God said, lest I deal with you after your folly, in that you have not spoken of me the thing which is right, like my servant Job. There it is again, 3 times in 2 verses. So those guys did what God said, and Job must have prayed, though we are not told. And God, the Lord, also accepted Job. So how did Job serve God during this difficult time? He endured what God allowed. Oh, ladies, I've known dear servants of God who lived their entire lives in great trial. You may be one of them. Heartache after heartache. But they endured it with trust in God. They not only don't curse God, but they don't even question God. Now, I will tell you, I'm not there. I want to be. When I see it in my own life, something that hurts me, I'm learning to say, Lord, what do you want me to learn through this? I don't like this one bit. But I'm still a follower of you. And Job was an intercessor for others. And verse 8 and 9 is where Job won over Satan's challenge. Satan said, if you make him suffer, he'll curse you to your face, God. Whoo! Let's give Job a hand. There's some things that God does not mention in this closing chapter, like what instigated the whole process. It was Satan. We are never told that Job knew about that. But there are some people who think Job wrote the book of Job, so he must have known what to put in the first chapter and what to put at the end. Does God ever mention Satan when he's given people their comeuppance? He does not. Well, that's interesting. And there's one friend that talked for maybe, I was going to count them, 5 chapters, I think, Elihu. God doesn't ever mention him. Look at verse 10. And the Lord turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends. And also the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. To this point, Job is still robbed of all his riches, bereaved of all his children, lost all his wealth, and covered with boils on the ash heap. That doesn't look like he had even up to what he had before. Well, some people come and show sympathy in verse 11. Finally. Wonder how long it took. Then came unto him all his brethren, all his sisters, and all they that had known him when he was rich. I bet he had a lot of those friends. and did eat bread with him in his house. Ooh, that would have been a party. And they bemoaned him and comforted him over all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him. And everybody gave him a piece of money or a piece of jewelry. Where were all those people while he was on the ash heap, I wonder. Now, I will tell you, it dawned on me studying for this lesson that God never mentions the boils that covered his body. But they must have been healed because of what transpires. He goes back into society, back into family life. Now, I am old enough to have had a smallpox vaccination when I was a baby. And I still have a scar right there where that big old ugly bull thing was. So I expect Job might have been covered with scars, or God may have erased that. But I think God dealt with his bulls. Verse 12, so the Lord blessed the latter end of Job more than his beginning. And then it numbers the animals, and that is twice the number of animals he had in before the trial. So his wealth has doubled. How many of you would like your 401k to double today? Well, that was wonderful. But verse 13 says he also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. That's the same number of children and gender of children. How could Job love the new ones like the first ones that died? Did you ever think of that? I expect some of you may have lost a child, maybe in a miscarriage. You still think about that? I do. I think I lost my daughter after John Mark was a baby. I've always wished for her. So how could Job be satisfied with the new children if he lost the first children? This is a rhetorical question. Did Job lose the first 10? I've given you a wonderful passage to peek at. Ephesians 3:15, or I meant to. Did I put it there? That's a New Testament verse. It's very short. It speaks of God's family, and it has this phrase, the whole family in heaven and in earth. Isn't that great? I think when he thought about those first 10, they were quiet thoughts. They were thoughts at peace. Like David, he thought, I can't see him, but I can go to him. 7 sons, and we're not given their names, nor are we given any names of the first 10 children. But 3 daughters, and we're given their names. In verse 14, Jemima, I thought she made pancakes. That name in the Hebrew means little dove. It speaks of a quiet, gentle, affectionate temperament. Jemima. And Kezia is a Hebrew word for cassia, which is cinnamon, which is an aromatic herb. Where do you get cinnamon? From the inner bark of trees. So it's kind of a hidden aroma that we enjoy on our cinnamon toast. And then the last one, Kerenhappuck. Kerenhappuck. I worked on that for many days. And her name means a box or a horn of paint, specifically cosmetics. You know, in old Egyptian art, this is even stone art, which is painted. Look at those eyes. Can you see that blue? All over the eyes and all the way back here. And when the King Tut display was at the Frisk 20 years ago, I went and saw a reproduction of King Tut's death mask. And he has the black because the Egyptian society, like many Persians, felt like if you had that on your eyes, it was a sign of power. I'm in charge. I hope that doesn't tell us about the personality of that little girl. What do those three things end up with? Gentleness, quietness, affection, something that smells fragrant, and something that actually Jezebel painted her eyes in the Book of Kings, and that paint has the thought of something sparkly in it, just like our makeup today. But something beautiful. Well, it does. It says that in all the land, in verse 15, no women were found so fair as the daughters of Job. I think Persian women are the prettiest race of women. They are often outstandingly beautiful, and they were the prettiest ones in the world. And Persian parents are especially proud of beautiful daughters. That's just a token of God's sweet mercy to Job. I'm going to give you some fancy girls, and they're going to bless your heart. And I know Job loved them because if you look at the last part of verse 15, their father gave them inheritance among their brethren. He gave his daughters inheritance. That is not an exceptional act. That is an outrageous act. If you gave your girls land, it would be like they were equal to your sons. We've been a long time getting there, hadn't we? Caleb also did this 2,000 years later, but I guess he learned it from Job. He gave his daughter some choice real estate when they got in Canaan. In fact, that act was so unconventional that it got in Joshua and is repeated in Judges, because who knew? Girls would ever have land. And Caleb gave his beautiful daughters land with springs on them. Oh. Verse 16 says, after this, Job lived 140 years and saw his sons and his sons' sons and some more sons' sons, even 4 generations. Now, do we know from the scripture how old Job was when it happened? We do not. But we know he lived 140 years longer. He was old enough to have had 10 adult children. I don't know when he started. Whatever the length of his life puts him somewhere between Noah, that lived 950 years, and Abraham, that lived 175 years. You remember reading Genesis, how the ages go down. And verse 17 says, so Job died being old and full of years, or full of days. That's a Bible expression that doesn't only mean long years to live, but full of blessings, godliness, wisdom. As I've thought about this, reading it, I think maybe Job wrote it. He was there. He would remember what those people said to him. He would remember his answers that he wanted to disappear and take back. So that makes me think God did tell Job the backstory about Satan. And some people say Job could not have written it because the description of him in the first verse, that he was such a perfect guy, that he wouldn't have written that about himself. Or about his death, because how would he know that? But we accept Deuteronomy as the book Moses wrote, and the last of that tells about his death. That's not a hard conflict. Somebody else just added that. One writer really helped me. He said, what was accomplished by what Job went through? What purposes, what thoughts, what devices of God were accomplished? Number one, Job was blessed and godly before the trial, but he was more blessed and more godly after the trial. Satan's lies were unmasked. Job's patience was rewarded. And ladies, I've been greatly enriched by my peek into the book of Job and the truth that's there. Now, I want us to continue studying Job in this way. We're going to have a lesson next time about doctrinal beliefs that Job had from his own words through the book. There's here, there. We're just going to cherry pick some things that he believed, but that affected his ability to deal with it. Because, ladies, we are facing hard things, and we need to be sure we have those beliefs. And he could recognize wrong when somebody said, this is because of your sin. He knew that's not what the Bible said. He knew that. And I will have to say, Job must have grown by leaps and bounds spiritually. I have learned that the hard times in my life are the times with the most growth. I wish I was able to grow in real happy times. But God mixes in the sunshine and the rain, what we need.